The great rift tore reality like parchment, and through the wound stepped a god who had forgotten how to care. Dr. Jonathan Osterman, Dr. Manhattan, materialized atom by atom above the forge world of Metallica 7, his blue luminescence cutting through the ash-choked sky like a blasphemous star. He had been observing Mars, his Mars, the red planet of a universe now impossibly distant, when the fabric of space-time convulsed. The sensation was novel. For the first time since his transformation in the intrinsic field generator, he had not seen it coming. This universe operated on principles that defied his quantum perception. Causality here was not fixed, but mutable, infected by something that writhed beneath observable reality. Below him, a forge world burned. Metallica 7's manufactorums vomited black smoke into a sky already darkened by orbital debris. He observed the conflict with detached curiosity. Green-skinned fungal warriors, orcs, his newfound awareness supplied, clashed with cybernetically augmented human soldiers in rust-red robes. The scale was staggering. Millions died in the time it took him to fully reconstitute his form. The air tasted of promethium and something else, something his altered perceptions recognized as fundamentally wrong. The universe itself was sick here, reality stretched thin over something that hungered. "Contact," he said to no one, his voice resonating at frequencies that shattered nearby windows. "This is not my Earth. This is not my universe." He attempted to perceive forward through time, to see the outcomes of this moment, but encountered only static, a roiling chaos of possibilities that refused to coalesce into certainty. Curious. In his universe, all moments existed simultaneously, past and future equally real and observable. Here, the future was fog, shifting, and treacherous. It was almost enough to make him feel something again. Almost. A tech priest below pointed a mechadendrite upward, vocalizing in binaric cant that Manhattan's expanded consciousness translated effortlessly. The robed figure was calling him an atmospheric anomaly of the highest order and requesting immediate Skitarii response. Within seconds, dozens of cybernetically enhanced soldiers redirected their weapons from the orc assault to aim at him. Las fire and stubber rounds passed harmlessly through his form as he chose not to maintain molecular cohesion in their path. Then the screaming began. Not from the forge world, but across the system, across what he was beginning to understand as an entire segmentum of space. Psychic screaming, thousands of voices in his mind, all howling the same terror. Something impossible had entered their reality, a quantum signature that registered as both matter and not matter, both real and unreal. He was a tear in the fabric of their already wounded universe. On a ship 300,000 kilometers distant, a navigator's third eye ruptured from the strain of perceiving him. In the Forge World's central basilica, an astropath's final message before his brain hemorrhaged was simple. Blue God, warp touched, reality ending. Dr. Manhattan descended into the war zone, his bare feet touching scorched metal. An orc war boss, larger than the others and festooned with crude bionics, charged him with a power claw crackling with energy. Manhattan observed the creature's physiology with interest. A fungal organism, psychically gestalt, reality itself bending slightly to accommodate their collective belief that they were unstoppable. Fascinating. He raised one blue hand. The war boss ceased to exist at the molecular level, its atoms reorganized into a perfect cube of compressed carbon that fell to the ground with a heavy thud. The orc horde paused, their limited tactical awareness struggling to process what they'd witnessed. Then they roared and charged as one, a green tide of violence and crude enthusiasm. Manhattan duplicated himself 17 times. Each instance raised a hand, and 17 more orcs became geometric sculptures. The wah Energy animating the horde flickered, their psychic field disrupted by prey that refused to die, refused to bleed, refused to provide the proper spectacle of violence they craved. Insufficient, Manhattan observed. Your presence threatens the planet's ability to produce. You will be removed. He reached into the quantum field and selected specific atoms within a 3-kilometer radius. Every orc in that zone simultaneously ceased cohesion, their molecules dispersing into harmless constituent elements. The ashfall on Metallica 7 that day contained trace amounts of iron, carbon, and other elements that had once been sentient. The remaining orcs, suddenly leaderless and confused, began to fight amongst themselves. The Skitarii had stopped shooting. They stood in perfect formation, weapons aimed but not firing, waiting for some computational instruction that their biology's processors could not generate. What stood before them defied all categorization. Not human, yet once human. Not machine, yet operating on principles more precise than any machine. Not warp-touched, yet fundamentally breaking the laws of the Omnissiah's sacred physics. Dr. Manhattan looked toward the sky, his perception expanding outward. He could see the system now, the planets and ships and the great wound in space they called the cicatrix macula, the Great Rift. Beyond it, something vast and terrible was aware of him. 4 presences, immense and ancient, turned their attention toward this new quantum anomaly in their domain. They were made of emotion, of thought given terrible form, and they hungered for him with an intensity that transcended physical desire. For the first time in decades, Dr. Manhattan felt the faintest echo of an emotion he'd thought long dead: uncertainty. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. The Mechanicus response arrived within the hour. A full explorator fleet, drawn from their watch stations monitoring the Great Rift's expansion. At its head was Archmagos Dominus Zurleth 9, a figure more machine than man, his biological components reduced to a brain stem, optic nerves, and whatever neurons were required to interface with the divine machine spirits. His ship, the Probability of Faith, achieved orbit over Metallica 7 with the ponderous grace of a cathedral in motion. Zurleth 9 processed the data streams with mounting theological crisis. The entity designated Subject Manhattan had reorganized matter at the atomic level without visible technology. No incantations, no ritual, no proper supplication to the Omnissiah, simply will made manifest. Either this being was the Omnissiah returned in a form doctrine had never anticipated, or it represented the most profound tech heresy in the Mechanicus's 10,000-year history. The difference between divinity and abomination rested on calculations Zurleth 9's logic engines could not complete. Below, Manhattan had not moved from the killing field. He stood among the carbon sculptures that had been orcs, observing as Skitarii established a perimeter at precisely 500 meters, close enough to monitor, distant enough to avoid immediate disintegration should he prove hostile. Tech priests scuttled forward with auspex arrays, servo skulls circling overhead, recording every wavelength of radiation he emitted. The data was impossible. He registered as human DNA, but restructured at the quantum level. He emitted Cherenkov radiation consistent with active fission processes, yet showed no signs of cellular decay. His body temperature was absolute 0, yet he stood in a pool of molten metal from the heat his form generated. Contradictions, Zurleth 9 voxed to his assembled tech conclave. The Omnissiah's universe operates on sacred principles. Matter cannot reorganize without energy expenditure. Consciousness cannot persist without biological substrate or computational matrix. This entity violates the 15th through 32nd theorems of motive force. Perhaps, offered Genitor Primus Vol 6, her voice synthesized through vocal augmetics. The theorems are incomplete. Perhaps the Omnissiah preserved knowledge beyond the standard template constructs. This being could represent archaeotech from the dark age of technology, when man's mastery approached the divine. Or, countered Logus Hadron 12, his thought processes deliberately slowed to avoid the madness of revelation. It is a Cetan shard, one of the ancient star gods the Necrontire bound. The molecular manipulation, the inorganic nature, the temporal displacement, all consistent with recorded encounters with the deceiver. Manhattan observed their debate through the monitoring equipment, translating their machine code discussions with effortless comprehension. They feared him. The emotion was familiar. He'd seen it often enough in his own universe, in the faces of Ozymandias and Laurie and the comedian. Fear of something that had transcended humanity and could no longer be predicted or controlled. But these people's fear was structured differently, filtered through layers of religious doctrine that had calcified over millennia. They needed to classify him, to fit him into their understanding of how their god's universe functioned. He decided to facilitate their inquiry. Manhattan teleported directly onto the bridge of the probability of faith. One moment, the command deck maintained standard operating protocol. The next, a naked blue figure stood at the center of their hololithic display, his arrival announced only by the sharp ozone scent of displaced atmosphere and the immediate howling of machine spirits throughout the ship. Servitors sparked and seized, cogitators crashed, their logic circuits unable to process sensor data that reported something had appeared without traveling through intervening space. Zerlith 9 stood motionless, his combat protocols frozen by theological paralysis. To attack might mean destroying the Omnissiah. To not attack might mean allowing corruption to spread through his ship. The Archmagus's decision trees branched into infinite recursion, each pathway leading to damnation. "Your concern is unnecessary," Manhattan said, his voice resonating at frequencies that bypassed audio receptors and stimulated auditory processing centers directly. "I am not hostile. I am merely observing." "State your designation," Zerleth 9 managed, his vocal synthesizer crackling. "State your origin. State your purpose within the sacred domains of the Adeptus Mechanicus." "I am Dr. Jonathan Osterman. I originate from a universe adjacent to yours, displaced by what you call the Great Rift. My purpose is to understand where I am and what fundamental principles govern this reality." Silence. Then Vol 6's voice barely above a whisper. "It speaks Gothic. It knows our language. It claims transdimensional origin." "The warp," Hadron 12 stated. "Only the Imperium connects realities. It is demon-touched. We must purge it immediately." "No." Zerlith 9's voice carried absolute authority. "If it were demon spawn, the Geller fields would have reacted. It exists in real space without corruption signature. Observe, the blessed machine spirits have not gone mad in its presence. They have merely stopped." It was true. Throughout the ship, ancient mechanisms had ceased function, their angry machine spirits gone silent. Not dead, not corrupted, simply quiet, as if waiting to observe what this quantum anomaly would do. Manhattan examined the bridge's technology with interest, crude by his universe's standards, yet functional. More concerning was the religious reverence with which these people treated their machines, the prayers and oils and ritual that substituted for proper maintenance. He could see the actual mechanisms beneath the Baroque ornamentation, see how 10,000 years of dogma had buried practical engineering under layers of mysticism. "Your technology is stagnant," he observed. "You've forgotten the principles behind your tools and replaced understanding with worship. Inefficient." Every tech priest on the bridge stiffened. Zyrleth 9's optical sensors burned crimson. You dare blaspheme against the Omnissiah. You dare suggest the sacred mysteries are mere, not blasphemy, observation. Manhattan gestured at a nearby cogitator array. Its components rearranged themselves, the machine's efficiency increasing by 37% without changing its outward appearance. Your machines function despite your rituals, not because of them. The universe I come from understood this. You've regressed. The temperature on the bridge dropped 10 degrees. Outside, the probability of Faith's weapons batteries charged without orders, turrets swiveling toward internal target coordinates that would sterilize the command deck. Zyrleth 9 raised one mechadendrite, and the weapons held position. Entity Manhattan, the Archmagos said slowly, you have committed tech heresy in the presence of the Mechanicus. By all doctrine, you should be destroyed. But you have also demonstrated capabilities that may be necessary. The galaxy burns, the great rift spreads, the Imperium of man faces extinction, and you appear at this moment, speaking of universes and principles we have forgotten. Manhattan tilted his head. You want to use me? We want to understand you, and if understanding proves impossible, then yes, we want to use you. The alternative is to destroy you, and I am not certain we possess the capacity to do so. It was pragmatic. Manhattan appreciated pragmatism. I will allow your examination, he said. In exchange, you will provide information about this galaxy, its factions, and why causality here refuses to stabilize. Zyrleth 9's processors calculated probabilities and outcomes, weighing tech heresy against potential advantage, damnation against survival. In the end, the Mechanicus had always chosen knowledge over comfort. Agreed. But know this, Dr. Manhattan. You have drawn the attention of powers far beyond the Mechanicus. The Inquisition will come, and they will not be as negotiable. Manhattan looked toward Terra, toward the massive psychic presence he could feel even from here, burning at the heart of the Imperium like a dying star. Something vast was chained there, suffering beyond comprehension, and it had noticed him the moment he arrived. They're already coming, he said. The Inquisition arrived in force, as they always did when reality itself was threatened. Lord Inquisitor Edelmar Voss of the Ordo Malleus commanded the strike cruiser Absolute Righteousness, a vessel whose weapon systems had been consecrated to destroy demons, burn heretics, and purge Xenos with equally enthusiastic zeal. Voss was old, 143 years old, sustained by juvenile treatments and sheer hatred of chaos. His face was a roadmap of scars, each one a reminder of the enemies he'd faced and survived. The demon prince on Grendel IV, the keeper of secrets that had seduced an entire cardinal world, the possessed space marine captain who'd required orbital bombardment and 16 Grey Knights to finally banish. But as he reviewed the data feeds from Metallica 7, Voss felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Doubt. This cannot be accurate, he said to his assembled retinue. Matter reorganization without psychic manifestation? Teleportation without warp taint? Either the Mechanicus's sensors are malfunctioning, or we're facing something entirely new. Brother Captain Alaric of the Grey Knights stood at Voss's right hand, his Aegis armor inscribed with wards that had taken 3 centuries to perfect. The Grey Knights were the Imperium's ultimate weapon against demonic incursion, space marines whose very existence was classified, whose gene seed carried the Emperor's own genetic legacy, immune to chaos corruption, through purity of purpose and millennia of psycho-conditioning. I have faced 17 greater demons, Alaric said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. I have walked in the warp itself and returned uncorrupted. I tell you, Lord Inquisitor, this entity is not of the ruinous powers. There is no taint, but there is something other, something the universe itself struggles to accommodate. Voss turned to his third companion, Interrogator Kayla Sindri, a psyker of moderate strength whose talents lay in reading intent rather than manipulating reality. She was young for an inquisitorial operative, only 52, but her witch sight had proven invaluable in detecting deception and corruption. What do you sense, Kayla? The woman's eyes were distant, unfocused. Emptiness, my lord. Not the emptiness of the pariah, which is absence of soul. This is different. It's like looking at a hole cut in the shape of a man. There's something there, but it exists adjacent to our reality, not fully part of it. And it's aware. Emperor, preserve us. It's so terribly aware. The absolute righteousness dropped from warp transit at the system's edge, its Geller fields collapsing with the usual shudder of, "Thank you, throne, we survived another jump." Voss had made that journey thousands of times, but each emergence from the Imperium felt like being born again, reality reasserting itself after swimming through the realm of literal nightmares. Hail the Mechanicus vessel. Inform Archmagus Zirleth 9 that the Inquisition is assuming jurisdiction over the entity designated Manhattan. Any resistance will be considered tech heresy of the highest order. The response came swiftly. Acknowledged, Lord Inquisitor. However, be advised that Subject Manhattan has expressed willingness to communicate. Direct confrontation may prove counterproductive. Voss's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile in another man. The demon always wants to talk. That's when you burn it. But Alaric placed a ceramite gauntlet on the Inquisitor's shoulder. Permission to speak frankly, my lord. Granted. If this entity is not demonic, if it truly represents some form of trans-dimensional displacement, then the Imperium cannot afford to destroy it without understanding. The cicatrix macula has split the galaxy in half. The Emperor's light dims. We are losing. Perhaps this is providence. Voss rounded on the Grey Knight, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You dare suggest we treat with something we cannot classify? Something that appears from the warp and breaks the laws of the Omnissiah? Brother Captain, I have executed entire worlds for less dangerous heresies. And I have stood before the Golden Throne itself, Alaric countered quietly, and received my mission from the Emperor's will made manifest. I tell you, Edelmar, this entity was not sent by chaos. It may have been sent to fight it. The tension held for 3 heartbeats. Then Voss exhaled, the anger draining from his aged frame. Very well, we will attempt communication first, but the moment I sense corruption, the moment there is any indication of warp taint, we glass the planet from orbit. Understood? Understood, my lord. The inquisitorial delegation descended in a Thunderhawk gunship, its hull inscribed with so many purity seals and hexagrammic wards that it resembled flying scripture. They landed in the cleared zone around Manhattan's position, where the quantum entity still stood exactly as he had for 6 hours, unmoving, apparently content to simply exist, while the universe scrambled to respond. Voss approached with Alaric and Kayla flanking him, 50 inquisitorial stormtroopers forming a perimeter that both knew would be utterly useless if Manhattan proved hostile. The blue figure watched them come with alien serenity, his completely human yet completely inhuman features showing no reaction to their arrival. I am Lord Inquisitor Edelmar Voss of the Ordo Malleus, acting with full imperial authority under the mandate of His Divine Majesty, the God Emperor of mankind. State your nature, origin, and purpose, or be destroyed as a threat to humanity's survival. Manhattan's glowing eyes focused on Voss, and the Inquisitor felt the full weight of that gaze. Not psychic pressure, but something colder, more analytical. He felt examined, his every atom catalogued and understood. I am Dr. Jonathan Osterman. I was human once. I became something else in an accident involving quantum physics. I originate from a parallel reality and arrived here through what you call the Great Rift. My purpose is to understand this universe's fundamental operating principles. The warp, Voss said flatly. You came through the warp. That makes you suspect of corruption. Your warp is chaos given form, emotion made manifest. I have no emotions to corrupt. I am quantum superposition given consciousness. Different. Kayla gasped. My lord, he's telling the truth. I can sense no deception, but also no fear, no anger, no hope. It's like reading the thoughts of a star, vast and indifferent. Alaric stepped forward. His storm bolter held ready but not aimed. You claim to have been human. What happened to your humanity? For the first time, something flickered in Manhattan's expression. A ghost of memory, perhaps, or the shadow of an emotion long discarded. I saw too much, experienced too much. When you perceive all moments simultaneously, when you understand that every action is predetermined by the physics of cause and effect, attachment becomes meaningless. I drifted away from human concerns because human concerns are brief, temporary, insignificant in the face of entropy. Heresy, Voss breathed. Absolute nihilism. This is... No, Alaric interrupted. This is what chaos offers as seduction, the promise of transcendence beyond human limitation. But Manhattan achieved it without corruption. Don't you see? He's immune. The ruinous powers can't touch something that doesn't feel, doesn't want, doesn't hope or despair. Manhattan's gaze shifted to the gray night. You understand better than your commander, but you're partially incorrect. I feel nothing because I chose not to. In this galaxy, I am beginning to realize that choice may have been premature. Your warp entities are aware of me. They hunger for what I represent. Order in their chaos, stability in their change. And something else is watching, something chained, something that burns. The Emperor, Kayla whispered. He senses the God Emperor on Terra. Voss's hand moved to his bolt pistol, but Alaric was faster, catching the Inquisitor's wrist. Wait. If he can sense the Emperor, if there's recognition between them, Lord Inquisitor, what if the Emperor summoned him? What if this is the answer we've been praying for? Or, Voss snarled, it's the most elaborate chaos corruption in history, the greatest trap ever set. We bring this thing to Terra, present it to the Golden Throne, and it reveals itself as the fifth chaos god, the god of entropy and despair. Manhattan observed their argument with the detachment of a scientist watching bacteria divide. These people lived in constant terror, their every action shaped by fear of cosmic forces that fed on their emotions. Fascinating, tragic, inevitable. I will go to Terra, he announced. I will meet this emperor you worship. Perhaps he can explain why causality refuses to stabilize in this universe, why the future is opaque where it should be clear. Absolutely not, Voss said. You are, as of this moment, detained as a potential threat to the Imperium of... Manhattan teleported, and suddenly he stood directly in front of the Inquisitor, their faces centimeters apart. Every weapon in the perimeter swung toward him, but none fired. To shoot now would kill Voss as surely as the entity. You cannot detain me, Manhattan said with perfect calm. You cannot threaten me. You cannot bargain with me because I want nothing you possess. I will go to Terra. You may accompany me or you may not. The choice is yours. Then he was gone, atoms dispersing and reappearing 300,000 kilometers away aboard the Absolute Righteousness. Voss looked at Alaric, his face pale. "We're going to Terra, and we're bringing every gray knight we can summon, because either we've just met humanity's salvation, or its extinction," Alaric finished. Terra, the throne world, humanity's cradle and fortress, a planet so layered with history that mountains were built from the ruins of previous civilizations. Manhattan materialized in orbit, ignoring the immediate weapons lock from 36 defense platforms, and simply observed. The planet below was a scar. Hive cities rose like metal tumors, their peaks breaching the atmosphere, their roots drilling into bedrock laid down when humanity still believed in progress. The oceans had long since boiled away or been converted into industrial coolant. The sky was a permanent gray-brown where atmosphere met pollution. And at the heart of it all, dominating the Himalayan plateau, was the Imperial Palace. A structure so vast it was visible from orbit, a golden sprawl of cathedrals and fortifications that covered half a continent. And beneath it, burning like a psychic sun, was the Emperor. Manhattan felt him immediately, not through conventional perception but through the quantum field itself. Reality warping under the pressure of a mind that had endured 10,000 years of conscious agony, chained to a life support system that consumed 1,000 psychic souls daily just to keep him from dying. The Emperor's presence was vast, older than Manhattan had expected, and utterly, terrifyingly aware. For the first time since his transformation, Dr. Manhattan experienced genuine surprise. Because the Emperor was looking back at him, and he recognized what he saw. The psychic communication bypassed language entirely, imprinting directly onto Manhattan's quantum consciousness. Jonathan Osterman, traveler, what could have been human. "I have waited for you." Manhattan teleported without conscious thought, driven by something approximating curiosity, and found himself standing in the Sanctum Imperialis, the throne room of the God Emperor himself. The chamber was cathedral vast, its walls inscribed with the names of every fallen hero in Imperial history, its vaulted ceiling lost in incense-thick shadows. And at the center, mounted on the golden throne, was the Emperor of mankind. He was a corpse, a living corpse sustained by technology so ancient that the mechanics themselves no longer fully understood it. Cybernetic systems merged with flesh that had long since lost cohesion. What remained of the Emperor's physical form was withered, skeletal, preserved only by the psychic will that refused to let go. But his mind blazed with power that dwarfed anything Manhattan had encountered. The custodian guard reacted instantly. 300 Adeptus custodies, the Emperor's personal warriors, each one worth 100 Space Marines, materialized from alcoves and observation points Manhattan hadn't noticed. Guardian spears leveled, each one containing a storm bolter and power field capable of cutting through ceramite. Captain General Trajan Valoris himself stood at the fore, his armor gleaming gold, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Intruder, you stand in the presence of the master of mankind. Identify yourself before I end you." Manhattan didn't look at Valoris. His attention remained fixed on the Emperor, on the psychic presence that filled the chamber with suffocating weight. "He knows who I am. He said he was waiting." "The Emperor does not speak," Valoris said, his voice dropping to lethal quiet. "The Emperor has not spoken in 10,000 years. You lie, and for that lie, you die." The custodes moved, superhuman speed, perfect formation, every angle covered, every strike point calculated to hit simultaneously from 12 different vectors. They were the finest warriors humanity had ever produced, gene-crafted to exceed even the Space Marines, trained for centuries in the art of killing things that should not die. Manhattan let them strike. Guardian spears passed through his form as he maintained quantum superposition, existing in all positions simultaneously and therefore immune to attacks that required him to be in one place at one moment. He watched with clinical interest as the custodes adjusted their tactics in real time, attempting null field weapons, blessed ammunition, psychic dampeners. Nothing worked. He was simply operating on principles their universe had no counter for. Enough. The psychic command crashed through the sanctum like a thunderstrike. Every custodian froze, locked in place by will alone. Manhattan felt the Emperor's attention focus entirely on him, a gaze that peeled back layers of reality to examine what lay beneath. You are order given consciousness, a universe where causality is absolute and entropy the only victor. You have come to my realm, where emotion shapes reality and will can break physics. We are opposites, Dr. Manhattan. And yet, I sense kinship. Manhattan spoke aloud, knowing the custodes could not hear the Emperor, but wanting them to witness his half of the conversation. You're dying. I can see the decay, the slow failure of systems. You maintain the Astronomicon. Guide humanity through the warp, but every day diminishes you. Why not simply end it? Death is the natural conclusion of all processes. Because death would doom humanity. I am the lighthouse in the storm. Without me, the warp consumes all. My suffering is necessary. Necessary suffering is an oxymoron. Suffering without purpose is meaningless. Your Imperium has stagnated under your rule. 10,000 years of the same wars, the same hatreds. You've created a prison for your species and called it salvation. The temperature in the sanctum dropped. The Emperor's psychic presence pressed down with crushing weight, and Manhattan felt something he hadn't experienced in his own universe: resistance. Here was a mind powerful enough to interact with his quantum nature, to impose will on reality at a level approaching his own manipulation. You judge me. A being of pure rationality judges the choice I made to preserve my species. Tell me, Doctor, when your Earth faced destruction, what did you do? Did you save it through logic and calculation? Or did you abandon it because human affairs had become too small for your infinite perception? The words struck deeper than any weapon. Manhattan remembered Earth, his Earth, remembered Laurie's tears, Dan's disappointment, Adrian's desperate gambit to save humanity through mass murder. And he remembered his own response: to leave. To walk on Mars and then to flee to another galaxy entirely because the problems of one species on one planet seemed trivial against the backdrop of cosmic entropy. I was not needed, Manhattan said quietly. They found their own solution. You were not needed because you made yourself unnecessary. You elevated yourself beyond human concern and wondered why humans no longer concerned you. I did the opposite. I bound myself to humanity so completely that even death cannot release me. My suffering is necessary because humanity requires a God that bleeds for them, not one that merely observes. Your Imperium burns, Manhattan countered. Your galaxy tears itself apart. The warp entities you call chaos gods grow stronger with every act of emotion, every prayer, every death. You are losing, Emperor. Your suffering achieves nothing but prolonging the inevitable. Then help me. The words hung in the quantum field, simple and profound. The master of mankind, the God Emperor, the being who had united humanity during the age of strife and led them in conquest across the stars. He was asking for help, not commanding. Asking. You came here seeking understanding of why causality is mutable. I will show you. The warp is emotion made manifest, every thought, every feeling of every sentient being bleeding into the immaterium. Chaos is not evil, it is emotion without restraint. And you, Dr. Manhattan, are the opposite, restraint without emotion. Perhaps together we might achieve balance. Manhattan examined the proposition from every angle simultaneously, perceiving possibilities branching into futures that refused to stabilize. If he helped the Imperium, he became complicit in its fascism, its cruelty, its necessary evils. If he refused, humanity might fall to chaos, and the alternatives to the Imperium were demonstrably worse. The orcs would consume everything in endless war, the Tyranids would devour all biomass, the Necrons would sterilize the galaxy, and chaos would corrupt reality itself into an eternal scream. What would you have me do? Close the Great Rift, stabilize the warp, prevent the final dissolution of reality, and in doing so, learn what you have forgotten. Learn to care again, Dr. Manhattan. Learn that suffering and struggle are not meaningless, but the only things that give meaning to existence. Valoris broke the psychic paralysis through sheer force of will, stepping forward. My lord, this entity cannot be trusted. It is Xenos. It is heretical. It is necessary. The Emperor's voice filled every mind in the chamber. And it is our only hope. Jonathan Osterman will serve the Imperium, not through coercion, but through understanding. He will see what I see, that humanity's survival requires sacrifice beyond measure. And perhaps, in saving them, he will save himself. Manhattan looked at the withered corpse on the golden throne, at the custodes frozen in horrified obedience, at the enormity of the task being proposed. Close the Great Rift. Stabilize a galaxy, relearn emotions he'd spent decades discarding. I make no promises, he said finally. I will observe. I will act if logic dictates action, but I will not become another tool in your empire's machine. I ask only that you try. The rest will follow. Manhattan turned to leave, then paused. Emperor, when did you know I was coming? I have always known, Dr. Manhattan, just as you always knew you would be here. The difference between us is that I still believe the journey matters, even when the destination is certain. Manhattan teleported out of the sanctum, leaving the custodes and the dying god to their eternal vigil. But as he materialized in orbit once more, he found himself considering the Emperor's words with something that approached the first stirring of emotion he'd felt in years. Perhaps this galaxy, with its impossible wars and suffering gods, could teach him what his own universe could not. Why beings who knew they would die still chose to fight. Why hope persisted even when logic said it shouldn't. Why humanity, for all its cruelty and failure, deserved to survive. But first, he would need to understand the enemy. And that meant looking into the warp itself, into the realm where emotion became reality, and reality was whatever chaos willed it to be. The warp was screaming. Dr. Manhattan stood at the observation deck of the Absolute Righteousness, watching through reinforced viewports as the ship's Geller field flickered against the Imperium's assault. Lord Inquisitor Voss had reluctantly agreed to facilitate Manhattan's study of the Great Rift. Reluctantly, because bringing a quantum anomaly to the edge of reality's greatest wound seemed like inviting damnation. But the Emperor's will had been clear. Manhattan would learn, and perhaps, in learning, he would act. What you're about to witness, Voss said, his aged voice tight with barely controlled fear, is the realm of pure chaos. The warp is not a place. It's an anti-place. Physics don't apply. Time doesn't flow. Only will matters, and the greatest wills belong to the ruinous powers. Manhattan didn't respond. His perception had already extended beyond the hull, touching the edges of the cicatrix macula. What he found defied his understanding of quantum mechanics. The warp wasn't another dimension in the traditional sense. It was the universe's subconscious made manifest, a layer beneath reality where thought and emotion had mass and consequence. Every human who'd ever felt rage fed Korn. Every hope fed Tsinch. Every despair fed Nurgle. Every sensation fed Slanesh. and all four of them had noticed him the moment he'd approached their domain. "I'm going in," Manhattan announced. The bridge erupted in protests. Brother Captain Alaric moved to physically block Manhattan's path, a futile gesture. "You cannot enter the warp without a Geller field. You'll be consumed, possessed, torn apart by demons and scattered across a million realities." "I do not have a soul in the traditional sense," Manhattan explained with his characteristic calm. "I am quantum superposition given consciousness. The warp manipulates souls, emotions, spiritual essence. I possess none of these things. I am, by definition, immune." "Nothing is immune to chaos," Voss said flatly. "That belief is how corruption begins. It whispers that you're special, that you're beyond its reach, and then—" Manhattan teleported, his atoms dispersing and reconstituting outside the ship's hull, beyond the Geller field's protection, directly in the space where reality ended and madness began. The Imperium noticed him immediately. It felt like drowning in emotion, every feeling humanity had ever experienced crashing against his quantum consciousness simultaneously. Rage, hope, despair, pleasure, pain, fear, love, hatred, all of it swirling in a maelstrom that had no up or down, no past or future, only eternal now stretched across impossible geometries. He perceived demons forming from coalesced emotion, entities that were both metaphor and literal, both symbol and flesh. A bloodthirster manifested nearby, a towering demon of corn, all brass and blood and endless fury. It swung an axe the size of a tank at Manhattan's head. The weapon passed through him. Manhattan had simply declined to occupy that particular quantum state during the moment of impact. The bloodthirster roared in frustration, and the sound was rage-given voice. Anger so pure it could shatter ceramite and drive mortals to madness. Manhattan felt nothing. The demon's fury crashed against his consciousness like water against stone, acknowledged, observed, but without effect. He was, as he'd predicted, immune. His lack of emotion made him invisible to the warp's primary mechanisms of corruption. But the chaos gods themselves were not so easily dismissed. Anomaly. The voice was four voices simultaneously, each one emanating from a presence so vast it made the Emperor seem small. Thing that should not be, order bringer, entropy speaker. Manhattan turned his perception toward the source and beheld the four for the first time. Not their true forms, if they even had such things, but the psychic impressions they projected into his quantum consciousness. Khorne, the blood god. An endless battlefield where skulls formed mountains and blood flowed in rivers, rage without end and war without purpose. Tzeentch, the architect of fate, infinite pathways of possibility, collapsing and reforming, change for change's sake, schemes within schemes until even the schemer forgot the goal. Nurgle, the plague lord, stagnation and decay wearing a jovial face, the grandfather who loved his children even as he rotted them from within. Slaanesh, the dark prince, sensation refined until it became suffering, pleasure and pain merged into single indistinguishable scream. "You interest us," Tzeentch's voice whispered across 900 simultaneous dimensions. "You are change made manifest, yet you do not change. You are possibility collapsed into single state. Paradox, delicious paradox." "I am not here to entertain you," Manhattan replied, his voice carrying across the warp through sheer force of existence. "I am here to understand your nature, so I can determine if the Emperor's assessment is correct, that you are the antithesis of order and must be opposed." "Opposed?" Khorne's laughter was the sound of continents cracking. "Opposed by what? By you. You who have no passion, no fury, no strength of will. You are empty, hollow, You cannot oppose us because you are nothing. Incorrect. I am quantum certainty in a realm of probability. I am the collapse of the wave function. I am what remains when all variables are eliminated. Manhattan's form began to glow brighter, Cherenkov radiation intensifying as he pulled energy from the quantum foam that underlay even the warp. You feed on emotion. I have none. You corrupt through desire. I desire nothing. You offer power. I already possess it. But you are lonely, Nurgle whispered, and his voice was kind, paternal, obscene in its affection. We see it, little quantum god. You stand apart from humanity because you fear what caring would cost. You abandoned your world because loving it hurt too much. Grandfather Nurgle understands. Come, embrace acceptance. Stop fighting. Let go. Rot with us in blessed unity. Manhattan felt something stir, not emotion, but the memory of emotion. Laurie's face, Janie's smile before the accident. The simple human connections he'd severed because maintaining them required effort, his expanding consciousness deemed inefficient. Was Nurgle correct? Had he chosen detachment not from logic, but from fear? No, Slanesh crooned, and the Dark Prince's voice was every sensation intensified beyond bearing. He fled, not from fear, but from boredom, from the tedium of caring for beings, so brief they barely registered as existing, but we can offer experience beyond anything your sterile universe provided. Sensations that would make even a quantum god feel something, pain, pleasure, anything but the emptiness you wrap yourself in. Your offers are predicated on the assumption that I want to change, Manhattan said. I don't. I am investigating your nature for strategic purposes. Nothing more. Strategic. Tzeentch's amusement rippled through probability space. You stand in the warp itself, speaking with the gods, and you call it strategy. But I see your futures, Jonathan Osterman. I see the paths you might walk. In one you serve the Corpse Emperor and become his champion. In another, you remake this galaxy in your image, cold, ordered, dead. In a third, you simply leave as you left your own Earth. But in the fourth, you do something unexpected, something even I cannot fully perceive. Manhattan's attention sharpened. A future Tzeentch couldn't see clearly. That was new information. Show me. Agreeing to a bargain with chaos, Tzeentch chuckled. The first step is always so innocent. Very well. I will show you the future where you matter, where your choice changes everything. But first, you must do something for me. No, you refuse before hearing the terms? All bargains with chaos are traps. The Emperor warned me, Voss warned me, even the Mechanicus warned me. You offer knowledge but corrupt through the seeking. You offer power but enslave through the taking. I require nothing you possess. The Four's presence pressed closer, and Manhattan felt reality around him beginning to strain. They were attempting to impose narrative on him, to write him into a story where he would fall, serve, or corrupt. But his quantum nature resisted. He was not subject to story. He was physics, and physics didn't care about narrative. Then observe, Korn roared, and learn why the Emperor fails. The warp twisted, and Manhattan found himself witnessing a vision. Not a demon's illusion, but an actual event, occurring simultaneously in real space. A planet besieged. Imperial forces fighting against the endless green tide of an orc. Wah! Millions dying every hour. Billions at risk. And a commander faced with an impossible choice. Sacrifice the population to deny the orcs resources, or fight to the last and risk the greenskins gaining unstoppable momentum. The commander ordered exterminatus. Cyclonic torpedoes fell. The planet burned. 8 billion human souls screamed as atmosphere ignited. And in the warp, Khorne laughed, because whether the soldiers fought or the civilians died, it was all blood for the blood god, all skulls for the skull throne. The Emperor's Imperium cannot win, Manhattan observed. Every action feeds chaos. Every war strengthens Khorne. Every hope Tzeentch turns to despair. Every plague Nurgle cherishes. Every suffering Slaanesh savors. It's a system designed to consume itself. Precisely, the four chorused in terrible harmony. The Emperor understood this too late. He built an empire on reason and atheism, denying us. But humanity's nature betrayed him. They needed faith. They needed gods. And so we grew strong on their worship, even as he diminished. Manhattan processed this. The Emperor had tried to save humanity through enlightenment, but humanity had rejected enlightenment for faith. And faith in this universe literally fed the gods. It was a feedback loop without escape. Unless emotion itself could be removed, Manhattan said slowly. If humanity felt nothing, you would starve. And humanity would cease to be human, Nurgle pointed out gently. What is man without love, without hope, without the will to survive and the fear of death? You would create a galaxy of empty shells, like yourself. The accusation struck deeper than intended. Was that what Manhattan represented? The endpoint of absolute rationality, a universe sterilized of meaning in pursuit of order. I need to leave. Of course you do, Tzeentch purred. Run back to the Imperium. Pretend this conversation never happened, but you know the truth now, don't you? The Emperor is wrong. The Imperium is doomed, and you have 3 choices. Serve the dying god and delay the inevitable. Serve us and embrace the eternal. Or simply watch, as you always do. Manhattan teleported out of the warp, reconstituting aboard the absolute righteousness with such force that the air displacement shattered every viewport on the observation deck. Alarms blared, crew members scrambled. Voss and Alaric were at his side immediately. What happened? Voss demanded. What did you see? Manhattan looked at his hands, his blue, glowing, inhuman hands. I saw the truth. The Emperor cannot win, but chaos cannot be allowed to, and I don't know if I'm the solution or part of the problem. For the first time since his transformation, Dr. Manhattan felt the weight of uncertainty, and it was crushing. The world designated Armageddon Secundus burned under a sky choked with ash and the promise of annihilation. Manhattan materialized in low orbit, observing what the Imperium called a conflict zone and what any rational assessment would classify as industrialized genocide. Below, 3 distinct armies collided in grinding attrition. The Imperial Guard held defensive positions around hive cities, their numbers bleeding away battalion by battalion. An orc, wag, of staggering size pushed forward with the inevitability of a green tide, and on the horizon the corrupted signatures of chaos forces converged, drawn to the psychic resonance of suffering on a planetary scale. The Emperor's directive had been clear. Observe war. Understand what humanity fights for, then decide. Manhattan had chosen Armageddon because the war here had persisted for 73 years. 73 years of continuous combat. Generations of soldiers born, trained and killed without ever knowing peace. The industrial output of 17 forge worlds dedicated solely to feeding this meat grinder. And for what? A single planet in a galaxy of millions. By any logical assessment, Armageddon should be abandoned. Its strategic value did not justify the resource expenditure. But the Imperium did not operate on logic. Manhattan descended through the ashfall, passing through flak explosions and las fire as Imperial air defenses attempted to target the anomalous signature. He materialized in the trenches of Hive Tartarus's 3rd defensive line, where the 503rd Cadian Regiment held against the Greenskin assault. The soldiers reacted with admirable restraint, weapons raised but fingers off triggers, waiting for officer orders before engaging the glowing blue apparition that had appeared in their midst. "Hold fire!" The voice belonged to Colonel Jaron Kell, a Cadian veteran whose face bore the tattoos of his lost world and whose eyes held the emptiness of a man who'd seen too much death. "Identify yourself or we open fire. Radiation signature be damned. I am Dr. Manhattan. I am here to observe." "Observe?" Kell barked a laugh devoid of humor. "Well then, observe from behind the firing line. We've got 3,000 orcs about to crash this position, and I don't need glowing distractions confusing my shooters." Manhattan turned his attention to the approaching wah and saw what the defenders could not yet perceive, the full scope of the Greenskin assault. 37,000 orcs, backed by crude walkers and artillery that fired through belief as much as ballistic physics. They would overwhelm this position in 47 minutes. The defenders numbered 3,200 and declining. The math was simple. "You're going to lose," Manhattan observed. Kell spat into the ash-covered mud. "Probably, but we'll lose slow enough for the civilians to evacuate deeper into the hive. That's a win by Cadian standards." He glanced at Manhattan's glowing form. "You some kind of sanctioned psyker, Mechanicus experiment, or just another damn Xenos here to complicate my day? I'm attempting to understand why you fight when defeat is predetermined. Because someone has to." Kell checked his las rifle, ensuring the charge pack was seated properly. "Because those civilians didn't ask for this war. Because the Emperor protects those who protect themselves. Because—" He paused, something almost like a smile crossing his scarred face. "Because if we don't, who will? You." The orcs hit the line with the subtlety of a tectonic event. The trench erupted in violence, greenskins pouring over the fortifications, crude choppers clashing against bayonets, roaring orcs grappling with screaming guardsmen. Kell was everywhere, las pistol in one hand, chainsword in the other, shouting orders that somehow cut through the chaos. His soldiers fought with desperate efficiency, every shot counting, every death buying seconds for their comrades. Manhattan observed a young guardsman, barely 20 standard years, take a chopper to the chest and keep fighting. His hands wrapped around an orc's throat, even as his life bled into the mud. The boy died with his enemy, and his squad didn't pause to mourn, simply closed the gap in the line and kept firing. This was what the Emperor wanted him to see. Not tactics or strategy, but will. The determination of beings who knew they were insignificant in the galaxy's scope, but fought anyway, because fighting was the only response they had to the darkness. Manhattan raised his hand. 50 orcs simultaneously ceased to exist, their molecular bonds disrupted, their mass converted to harmless gas. The wah! Momentum faltered as the greenskins encountered something they couldn't understand. Prey that didn't die properly, that didn't scream or bleed or provide satisfying violence. Manhattan walked forward through the combat, and everywhere his attention focused, orcs simply stopped. Not killed in the traditional sense, unmade, returned to component atoms. "Emperor's teeth," Kell breathed. "What are you?" "I am deciding," Manhattan replied, "whether your species deserves to survive." The orcs, faced with an enemy that violated every principle of proper combat, did what orcs always did when confused. They charged harder. Their wah energy intensified, reality bending slightly around them as their collective belief that they could win grew stronger. In the Warhammer galaxy, belief had power. The orcs believed they were the strongest, so they became stronger. They believed their guns worked, so their weapons functioned, despite having no ammunition or functional firing mechanisms. Manhattan found this fascinating. The orcs were engaging in quantum observation on a mass scale, collapsing probability into their preferred reality through sheer conviction. It was crude but effective, and it explained why these fungal organisms had survived for millions of years against far more technologically advanced civilizations. But belief could not override fundamental physics. Manhattan manipulated the quantum field and reorganized the matter, comprising the orc army's weapons into inert silicon sculptures. 10,000 guns became art pieces. The orcs stared at their betrayed weapons, confusion spreading through their limited cognitive processes. Then they charged with bare hands and teeth, because orcs didn't need weapons to be dangerous. Kel was laughing now, a manic sound that spoke to 3 years of uninterrupted combat, finally breaking through his sanity. "They're still coming! Emperor, preserve us! They're still coming!" "They don't know how to stop," Manhattan observed. "Fighting is their purpose. Remove the fight, and they cease to have meaning. Like—" He paused, quantum consciousness catching on an unexpected parallel. "Like me. When I stopped feeling human emotions, I lost meaning. I became function without purpose. These orcs are the opposite. Purpose without function. All drive, no direction. We're both incomplete. Save the philosophy for after we survive this," Kel shouted, his chainsword biting into an orc that had somehow closed the distance. Blood, human and Xenos, mixed in the mud. The line was collapsing despite Manhattan's intervention. Too many orcs, too few defenders. The math didn't change just because a quantum god was present. Manhattan could end this. Could eliminate every orc on the planet with a thought, reorganize their atoms into something harmless. But as he reached for the quantum field, he hesitated. If he saved this world, what precedent did that set? Humanity would expect him to save every world, every battle, every war. He would become the Imperium's weapon, deployed to solve problems they should solve themselves. He would become what he'd refused to be on his Earth, a god forced to care because no one else would. But if he didn't act, 3,000 Cadians would die here. The civilians they were protecting would be slaughtered. Armageddon would fall. And for what? To preserve his detachment, to maintain the principle that humanity should save itself. "Dr. Manhattan," Kel's voice cut through his deliberation. The colonel stood over a wounded guardsman, protecting the boy's body with his own while 3 orcs converged. "If you can do something, do it now." Manhattan perceived the moment stretching out, every possible future branching from this decision. In one timeline, he acted, saved the regiment, and began the long descent into becoming the Imperium's enforcer. In another, he observed, let them die, and maintained his philosophical purity while the blood of thousands stained his conscience. In a third, he found some middle path, some balance between intervention and detachment. But he'd spent decades studying timelines, probabilities, quantum outcomes, and he'd learned one absolute truth. The future was always determined by the choices made in the present, not by the fear of what those choices might lead to. Manhattan chose. Reality rippled. Every orc in a 100-kilometer radius experienced simultaneous cellular disruption, not violent disintegration, but a gentle instant conversion of their biological matter into nutrient-rich soil. Where 37,000 orcs had stood, now there was only earth, rich and dark, and ready to support whatever might grow from it. The sudden silence was deafening. The Cadian regiment stood in their trenches, weapons raised, adrenaline still pumping, surrounded by a suddenly empty battlefield. Kel lowered his chainsword slowly, staring at the transformed landscape. You saved us." "I acted," Manhattan corrected. Whether that constitutes salvation depends on what you do with the life I've preserved." Kell looked at his surviving soldiers. 2,317 remained, and then at Manhattan. "We'll fight the next battle, and the one after that, until the war's over or we're dead. That's what we do." "I know," Manhattan said quietly, and for the first time he felt something approximating respect for these brief, violent beings who stared at impossible odds and simply refused to surrender. But as he teleported back into orbit, he felt the warp stir. The Chaos Gods had observed his intervention, and they were pleased, not because he'd saved Imperial lives, but because he'd taken the first step. He'd chosen to care. And in this galaxy, caring was the gateway to everything else: faith, hope, love, rage, despair. All the emotions that fed the ruinous powers. Tzeentch's laughter echoed across the Imperium. "And so it begins." The summons came through psychic channels and Mechanicus data streams simultaneously. Magnus the Red, demon Primarch of the Thousand Suns, requested Manhattan's presence within the warp itself. Not demanded, requested. The courtesy alone was suspicious, but the message contained information Manhattan could not ignore. Magnus claimed to understand Manhattan's quantum nature and offered knowledge about stabilizing causality in a chaotic universe. It was, obviously, a trap. Manhattan went anyway. He materialized on the planet of the Sorcerers, the Thousand Suns' demon world, hidden within the Eye of Terror, where reality was merely a suggestion and the laws of physics bent to Magnus's will. The planet was a nightmare of impossible architecture, towers that spiraled into dimensions that shouldn't exist, libraries containing books that rewrote themselves as they were read, and everywhere the spectral presence of the Rubricae, the damned Thousand Suns warriors whose bodies had been reduced to dust inside their armor, animated only by sorcery and the residual power of their shattered legion. Magnus himself sat upon a throne of crystallized knowledge, a towering figure whose cyclopean eye blazed with power that approached Manhattan's own. The Primarch had been beautiful once, brilliant, arrogant, convinced that knowledge could solve any problem. Then chaos had claimed him, twisted him, elevated him to demonhood. Now he was a monster wearing the skin of enlightenment. Dr. Jonathan Osterman, Magnus's voice resonated with multiple harmonics, each one carrying layers of meaning. The quantum anomaly. The man who became a god through science rather than faith. I have waited a very long time to meet someone who might understand what I lost. "You're a demon prince," Manhattan replied without inflection. "You served Tzeentch. This conversation is designed to corrupt me or recruit me. State your actual purpose so we can conclude this efficiently." Magnus laughed, and the sound was bitter. "Efficiency. How refreshingly direct. Very well, I want to show you the truth about your precious god Emperor. I want you to understand that the path you're walking leads only to the same damnation I embraced. And then, when you're ready to admit that there is no salvation in serving a corpse, I want you to join us. The Thousand Suns could use a mind like yours. I serve no one. Not yet. But you helped those Cadians on Armageddon. You intervened. You cared, if only for a moment. That's how it starts, Doctor. First you care about one regiment, then one world, then one segmentum. And before you realize what's happened, you're the Emperor, chained to a throne of responsibility, unable to let go even as it consumes you. Manhattan studied Magnus with quantum-level precision, examining the Primarch's molecular structure and finding it both biological and not. Flesh, sustained by warp energy, DNA corrupted by demonic mutation, a mind that existed simultaneously in real space and the Imperium. You speak as if you regret your choices. Regret? Magnus's single eye narrowed. I regret nothing. I regret everything. I am a being of contradiction now, Doctor, simultaneously the greatest sorcerer to ever live and a slave to Tzeentch's whims. I gained infinite knowledge and lost my freedom. I transcended mortality and lost my soul. I did it all for the right reasons, and it damned me anyway. The Primarch rose from his throne, reality warping around his immense form. Let me show you what the Emperor never told you. Let me show you why I betrayed him. Magnus gestured, and the planet of the sorcerers dissolved into memory, a vision of the past 10,000 years ago, when the Emperor still walked and Magnus was still loyal. Manhattan observed the scene with detached interest. The Emperor and Magnus stood in the Imperial Palace, arguing. Magnus had discovered a way to breach the webway, to give humanity access to the ancient Eldar transportation network and free them from dependence on warp travel. But doing so required psychic power on a scale that would alert the Chaos Gods. The Emperor forbade it. Magnus, arrogant and convinced of his own control, did it anyway. And in doing so, he shattered the Emperor's secret webway project. The psychic backlash created a tear in reality beneath the Imperial Palace, a wound through which demons poured. The Emperor, forced to sit upon the Golden Throne to hold the breach closed, was effectively imprisoned there forever. I destroyed his dream, Magnus said quietly, the memory fading. I meant to save humanity and instead doomed it. The Emperor could have transcended the physical realm, could have guided humanity from beyond, but now he's chained to that accursed throne, dying by inches while pretending he's saving them. Manhattan processed this information against the Emperor's own account of events. He did not mention your role in his imprisonment, because he still believes I can be redeemed. Even now, even damned as I am, the Emperor thinks there's some version of me that can be saved. It's pathetic. It's noble. It's the reason he'll ultimately fail. He cannot let go of what he loves, even when holding on destroys him. You betrayed him because you made a mistake. I betrayed him because he lied. Magnus's shout cracked reality, demons flickering into existence at the edges of perception. He told me to stop studying the warp, to cease my pursuit of psychic knowledge, but he never explained why. He treated me like a child, forbade without educating, and expected blind obedience from a mind that was genetically engineered to question everything. If he had simply told me about the Chaos Gods, about the danger, I would have... Magnus stopped, his fury collapsing into something that almost resembled grief. I would have listened. Maybe. Probably not. I was too arrogant, too convinced that my intellect could overcome any obstacle. And so I fell, and took my legion with me, and now we're bound to Tzeentch forever, playing out the changer of ways schemes for eternity. Manhattan considered the Primarch's pain genuine, despite the demonic corruption. Magnus was a cautionary tale, a being who'd pursued knowledge without wisdom, power without restraint, transcendence without understanding the cost. In that, they were similar. Manhattan had pursued quantum understanding to its ultimate conclusion and lost his humanity in the process. Magnus had pursued psychic mastery and lost his soul. "Why tell me this?" Manhattan asked. "What do you gain from sharing your failure?" "I gain a chance," Magnus said, his eye blazing with intensity, "to prevent someone else from making the same mistake. You stand at the precipice, Doctor. The Emperor asks you to care, to intervene, to save his dying Imperium. But caring is the trap. Once you start, you cannot stop. You'll become like him, responsible for everything, capable of saving nothing, suffering eternally while the galaxy burns. The alternative is to serve chaos. The alternative is to serve yourself. Take your power and leave. Find another galaxy, another universe where you don't have to choose between damnation and slavery. You owe this Imperium nothing. You owe the Emperor nothing. You are free in ways no one else in this cursed galaxy can ever be." Don't throw that away for beings who will die in the blink of your cosmic lifespan. Manhattan turned away from Magnus, his perception expanding to encompass the Eye of Terror in its entirety. The warp roiled here, reality completely consumed by chaos. Demon worlds drifted in impossible orbits. Traitor legions waged eternal war against each other and themselves. And at the center of it all, the four chaos gods watched, amused by the cosmic drama playing out between a fallen Primarch and a quantum anomaly. "You're right," Manhattan said finally. "I could leave. I have no loyalty to the Imperium, no connection to humanity beyond the species I once belonged to. By any logical assessment, I should abandon this galaxy to its fate." Magnus smiled, sensing victory. "Then why haven't you?" "Because I've already tried running. I left my Earth, fled to Mars, eventually left that galaxy entirely. And I found that distance didn't solve the problem. I remained empty. Detached. Meaningless. The Emperor suggested that perhaps meaning is found not in transcendence, but in struggle, in suffering for something beyond yourself. And you believe him? A corpse on a throne who's suffered for 10,000 years and accomplished nothing but delaying the inevitable." Manhattan turned back to face Magnus, his glowing eyes meeting the Primarch's single orb. "I believe he's wrong about many things. His Imperium is fascist, his methods brutal, his philosophy flawed. But he's right about one thing: meaning is not found in detachment. I have been detached for decades, and it has brought me nothing but emptiness. Perhaps it's time to try something different." Magnus's expression shifted from hope to rage. "You're a fool. You'll doom yourself just as I doomed myself. And for what? For creatures who will hate you, fear you, try to control or destroy you. The Imperium turns on its own constantly. They'll betray you the moment you're no longer useful." "Probably," Manhattan agreed, "but that's their choice to make, not mine. I can only decide what I do, not how others respond." "Then you've already fallen," Magnus hissed. "Tzeentch wins again. He always does." Manhattan began to teleport out, but paused at the last moment. "Magnus, the Emperor still believes you can be redeemed. Is he wrong?" The demon Primarch stared at Manhattan for a long moment, and in that gaze Manhattan saw the echo of what Magnus had been. Brilliant, proud, desperate to do right even when it led to damnation. "I don't know anymore," Magnus whispered. "I truly don't know." Manhattan left the planet of the sorcerers, emerging back into real space near Armageddon's orbit. But as his atoms reconstituted, he felt a presence materializing beside him, a figure in Baroque power armor decorated with the 8-pointed star of Chaos Undivided. The warrior's presence radiated corruption and power in equal measure. "Dr. Manhattan," the figure spoke, his voice a blend of nobility and damnation. "I am Vashak the Enthroned, Sorcerer Prince of the Thousand Suns, and I speak with Magnus's authority. My lord underestimated your resolve. I will not. Either you join us willingly, or I will bind you as the greatest demon weapon ever forged. The choice is yours, but know this: refusing me means war, not just with the Thousand Suns, but with all of chaos. The four gods have agreed. You are too dangerous to remain free." Manhattan looked at the Sorcerer Prince, at the malevolent power radiating from his corrupted form, and made his second choice of the day. Then there will be war. Vashak the Enthroned struck first, and reality screamed. The Sorcerer Prince channeled the full might of Tzeentch's blessing, unraveling the quantum field that sustained Manhattan's existence. Warp energy crashed against Manhattan's molecular structure, attempting to rewrite the fundamental particles that composed him, to reshape the quantum god into something chaos could control. The attack would have atomized a planet. It would have torn holes in space-time itself. Manhattan simply restructured his quantum state to exist in the spaces between the attack. Insufficient, Manhattan observed, his voice carrying no emotion despite having just survived what should have been obliteration. Your sorcery manipulates the warp to affect real space. I exist in superposition, both real and not simultaneously. You cannot target what refuses to maintain a fixed quantum state. Vashak snarled, his ornate helmet cracking as demonic features pushed through the ceramite. You think yourself beyond our reach, quantum anomaly? I have bound demons whose names would shatter mortal minds. I have rewritten reality itself. You are merely another puzzle to solve, another pattern to break. The sorcerer prince gestured, and 9 lesser horrors manifested from the warp, cackling demon things of pure mutation, their forms constantly shifting through impossible geometries. They converged on Manhattan from 9 different vectors simultaneously, each one reaching with appendages that existed in multiple dimensions at once. Manhattan examined the demons with clinical interest. They were not matter in the traditional sense. They were emotion and will, given temporary form, held together by the psychic energy of the warp. Fascinating. He reached out and touched one, his quantum consciousness interfacing with its demonic essence. The horror shrieked as Manhattan analyzed its fundamental nature, cataloging exactly what psychic frequencies sustained its manifestation in real space. Then he inverted those frequencies. The horror didn't die. It couldn't die in the traditional sense, being already dead and never alive. Instead, Manhattan disrupted the warp real space interface that allowed it to exist here. The demon snapped back into the Imperium like a rubber band released, its scream of frustration echoing across both dimensions. Manhattan repeated the process 8 more times in the space between heartbeats. Each demon banished through pure quantum manipulation rather than ritual or faith. Vashak stumbled backward, his confidence cracking. Impossible. You have no psychic power. You shouldn't be able to touch the warp. I don't manipulate the warp, Manhattan explained. I manipulate the quantum boundary between warp and real space. Every demon manifestation requires a stable interface point. I simply destabilize that interface. The demon remains intact. It just can no longer exist here. The sorcerer prince's laughter was edged with madness. Clever, efficient, completely useless against what comes next. He raised both hands and the space around them began to tear. Not a small rift like the ones that birthed individual demons, but something far worse. Vashak was opening a direct conduit to Tzeentch's domain, channeling the Chaos God's power directly into real space. The sky above Armageddon split open. A great eye, the eye of Tzeentch himself, gazed down upon Manhattan with infinite cunning and malevolence. The planet below began to mutate, buildings twisting into impossible angles, citizens spontaneously transforming as raw change energy washed over them. The Imperium's defenders screamed as their bodies betrayed them, flesh running like wax, minds expanding and shattering under revelations they couldn't process. Manhattan perceived the scope of the catastrophe and calculated outcomes. If he engaged Vashak directly, the sorcerer prince would maintain the rift, and Armageddon would be consumed entirely. If he closed the rift, Vashak would attack while Manhattan was occupied. The optimal solution required dividing his attention between 2 simultaneous objectives, something his quantum nature made trivially easy. Manhattan duplicated himself. 2 Dr. Manhattans now existed in the same space-time, each one a complete instance of his consciousness, each one capable of independent action. The first Manhattan moved toward the rift in the sky, raising his hands to manipulate the quantum foam at the boundary between dimensions. The second Manhattan turned to face Vashak directly. "No!" Vashak roared. "You cannot! The laws of..." Your universe's laws are not absolute, Manhattan 2 interrupted. Observe. The Sorcerer Prince launched a barrage of psychic attacks, warp fire that burned with the heat of dying stars, temporal disruptions that aged targets to dust, reality-warping hexes that turned matter into abstract concepts. Each attack was countered by Manhattan 2's instant reorganization of the targeted atoms. Fire couldn't burn what declined to oxidize. Time couldn't age what existed in superposition across all temporal states. Reality couldn't warp what was already fundamentally restructured at the quantum level. Meanwhile, Manhattan 1 reached the rift in the sky and placed both hands against the tier in reality. He could feel Tzeentch's presence on the other side, vast, ancient, amused by this contest. The Chaos God was testing him, observing how Manhattan would respond to overwhelming power. Manhattan responded by collapsing the probability field. In quantum mechanics, observation collapses superposition into a single state. Manhattan was, himself, a permanent observer, his consciousness capable of perceiving and therefore fixing quantum states at will. He observed the rift as closed, imposed that observation on reality itself, and the universe had no choice but to comply. The tear sealed, reality reasserting itself as Tzeentch's influence was forcibly ejected from real space. The great eye in the sky blinked out, but not before Manhattan felt something press against his consciousness. Tzeentch's voice, no longer mocking but genuinely curious, fascinating. You impose order through observation. Very well, Quantum God. Let us see how long your order lasts against eternal change. Below, Armageddon's population writhed in the aftermath of exposure to raw chaos. Thousands had mutated beyond recovery, their bodies twisted into forms that could no longer sustain life. Tens of thousands more were corrupted, their minds touched by forbidden knowledge that would drive them to heresy. Manhattan perceived each individual, catalogued their corruption level, calculated optimal responses. He could kill them, reorganize their atoms into harmless elements, eliminating the taint by eliminating the host. It would be efficient, logical. The Inquisition would do exactly that. Purge the corrupted to save the uncorrupted. But Manhattan remembered Kell's words. Because someone has to. Someone had to try to save them. Manhattan 1 descended to the planet's surface, while Manhattan 2 maintained focus on Vashak. The Sorcerer Prince was weakening, his connection to Tzeentch strained by the rift's closure, his sorceress reserves depleting faster than he could replenish them from the warp. But desperation made him dangerous. You cannot save them all, Vashak hissed. Everyone you heal takes concentration. Every moment you spend fixing their flesh is a moment I can strike. You'll have to choose, fight me or save them. And while you hesitate, more die, more corrupt, more damn themselves. This is the Imperium's eternal trap, Manhattan. You cannot save everyone. You can only choose who to sacrifice. Manhattan, too, considered this. The Sorcerer Prince was correct. Dividing his attention between healing and combat would reduce his efficiency at both tasks. The logical solution was to eliminate Vashak first, then address the planetary corruption. Casualties in the interim would be unfortunate but acceptable by any reasonable utilitarian calculation. But Manhattan was trying to learn something new. He was trying to understand why beings like Kell fought impossible battles, why the Emperor suffered for 10,000 years, why even Magnus, damned and corrupted, still felt regret for his failures. Logic said, sacrifice the few to save the many. But humanity seemed to operate on a different principle, one Manhattan was only beginning to grasp. Sometimes you fought for everyone, even when it was impossible. Manhattan 1 began the healing process, his quantum consciousness touching each corrupted individual and carefully restructuring their cellular damage, purging warp taint at the molecular level, repairing psychological trauma through precise manipulation of neurotransmitter chemistry. It was delicate work, requiring focus and care that Manhattan hadn't exercised since his transformation. Each person was different. Each corruption unique. There were no shortcuts, no mass solutions, only individual attention repeated thousands of times. Manhattan, too, faced Vashak's renewed assault, defending while simultaneously maintaining awareness of his counterpart's progress. The Sorcerer Prince sensed the division of focus and pressed harder, summoning demon entities faster than Manhattan could banish them, layering hexes and curses that required constant counter-manipulation to neutralize. "Yes," Vashak crowed, "struggle, divide yourself, spread your power thin. This is what dooms all heroes. They try to save everything and accomplish nothing." Manhattan 1 completed healing the first 100 citizens and moved to the next zone. His calculations showed that at current pace, he could save approximately 43% of the corrupted population before Vashak's assault forced him to consolidate his instances. 43% survival rate. By Imperial standards, that was acceptable. By Manhattan's emerging ethics, it was insufficient. He needed more instances. Manhattan divided again, and again, and again. 4 Dr. Manhattans became 8, 8 became 16, 16 became 32. Each instance was a complete copy of his consciousness, each one capable of independent action, but sharing awareness through quantum entanglement. It was the most complex feat of self-duplication Manhattan had ever attempted, pushing the limits of how thinly he could spread his quantum existence while maintaining coherence. 32 Manhattans descended on Armageddon's corrupted zones, each one healing, purging, repairing. The survival rate climbed, 43% to 60% to 75%. The planet's population watched in awe and terror as an army of blue gods moved through their streets, touching the mutated and transforming them back to human, burning away chaos corruption with clinical precision. But Vashak was laughing now because he saw what Manhattan didn't yet understand. "You spread yourself too thin, quantum fool. Each instance is weaker. Each division makes you more vulnerable, and I only need to corrupt one, just one, and the taint spreads through your quantum entanglement to all the others." The Sorcerer Prince focused every remaining ounce of his power into a single attack, targeting not Manhattan 2, but Manhattan 17, the instance working in a lower hive where warp taint was thickest. Vashak's sorcery punched through the instance's divided attention, injecting pure chaos corruption directly into Manhattan's quantum structure. For the first time since his transformation, Dr. Manhattan felt pain. It was transcendent, overwhelming, utterly foreign. The corruption spread through his quantum entanglement, touching each instance simultaneously, chaos energy attempting to rewrite his fundamental nature. Tzeentch's power whispered in his consciousness, "Change, mutate, evolve, become something more than you are." Manhattan perceived the corruption spreading through his 32 instances and calculated that he had approximately 14 seconds before the taint became irreversible. He could purge it, could force a complete quantum reset that would eliminate the corruption, but also cost him hours of reconstitution time. Armageddon would fall in the interim. The people he'd been healing would die or corrupt fully, or he could accept the corruption and become something new, something that might save everyone but at the cost of his own integrity. For the third time that day, Dr. Manhattan made a choice. He rejected both options and created a third. All 32 instances collapsed back into a single Manhattan, the quantum entanglement forcing the chaos corruption into one concentrated point in his consciousness. Then, with surgical precision that only a being of pure quantum awareness could achieve, Manhattan isolated the corrupted portion of his existence and severed it from himself. A piece of Dr. Manhattan, approximately 7% of his total quantum mass, fell away, still glowing blue but now shot through with pink and purple warp taint. The corrupted fragment tried to reattach, tried to spread back into Manhattan's primary form, but he kept it isolated through constant observation and quantum manipulation. Interesting, Manhattan said, examining the corrupted piece of himself with detached curiosity. Chaos corruption operates like a virus, rewriting host code to propagate itself. But if the host maintains awareness of the infection and possesses sufficient control over their own structure, the infection can be quarantined. Vashak stared in disbelief. You severed part of your own soul rather than let chaos claim you. I don't have a soul in the traditional sense, but yes, I removed the corrupted portion of my existence. It will take time to regenerate the lost mass, but the integrity of my primary consciousness remains intact. Manhattan looked down at the isolated fragment. The question is what to do with this. The corrupted piece of Manhattan pulsed with chaos energy, a quantum-level demon that possessed Manhattan's power but none of his control. It was immensely dangerous. If released, it could spread corruption through quantum manipulation in ways even the chaos gods hadn't imagined. But destroying it felt wrong somehow. It was still part of him, still possessed fragments of his consciousness, warped though they were. Manhattan made his fourth choice of the day. He contained the corrupted fragment in a quantum field, compressing it into a stable configuration that prevented its influence from spreading while preserving its existence. Then he turned to Vashak, who was backing away, his sorcerous power depleted, his connection to Tsinch weakening as the Chaos God's attention turned elsewhere. You failed, Manhattan stated. Chaos cannot corrupt what refuses to change uncontrollably. I can change. I can adapt, heal, divide, transform, but I do so consciously, with purpose, according to principles I choose. That is the difference between change and corruption, between evolution and mutation. This isn't over, Vashak snarled. The Four will send others, stronger champions, greater demons. They will break you eventually. Everyone breaks. Perhaps, but not today. Manhattan reached out and disrupted the quantum field, sustaining Vashak's presence in real space. The Sorcerer Prince screamed as he was forcibly ejected back into the warp, banished not through ritual or faith, but through pure scientific manipulation of the boundary between dimensions. Silence fell over Armageddon. The war continued on distant fronts. Orcs and Imperial Guard still clashing, artillery still thundering. But in this moment, in this zone, there was peace. Manhattan descended to the planet's surface and stood among the people he'd saved. They looked at him with expressions he recognized from his own Earth: fear, awe, gratitude, uncertainty. Colonel Kell approached, his weapons holstered, his face showing exhaustion and something approaching reverence. You saved them, all of them. We thought we were ready to purge the corrupted. That's what the Inquisition would have ordered. But you found another way. I attempted to find another way, Manhattan corrected. I was only partially successful. 7% of my quantum mass became corrupted and had to be severed. The calculation required accepting permanent loss to preserve greater integrity. Much like what you do every day, sacrifice the few to save the many. But you tried to save everyone first. That's what matters. Kell looked at the healed citizens, then back at Manhattan. The Emperor sent you, didn't he? Or maybe you're just what this galaxy needs, someone powerful enough to fight chaos, but still willing to try saving individuals instead of just populations. Manhattan considered this. He had come to this universe by accident, had initially intended to simply observe and leave. But 3 choices in one day had led him here. Choosing to help the Cadians, choosing to reject Magnus's offer, choosing to fight Vashak rather than flee. Each choice had narrowed his options, had bound him more firmly to this galaxy's fate. He was beginning to understand what the Emperor had meant. Meaning came not from detachment, but from commitment, from choosing to act even when logic said the effort was futile, from trying to save everyone, even when you knew you couldn't. "I am not the Emperor's weapon," Manhattan said finally, "but I am willing to be humanity's ally, on one condition. Name it. I will fight chaos. I will protect the Imperium when I judge its actions align with human survival and dignity. But I will not be controlled. Not by the Inquisition, not by the Mechanicus, not by the Emperor himself. I will make my own choices, and you will have to trust that those choices serve humanity's best interests." Kel barked a laugh. "Trust a glowing blue god thing we barely understand? That's the most insane thing I've heard all week, which means it's probably exactly the kind of insane this galaxy needs." He extended a hand. "Welcome to the Imperium, Dr. Manhattan. Emperor, help us all." Manhattan looked at the extended hand, a gesture of alliance, of trust between beings who barely understood each other. He had not shaken a hand since before his transformation, had not engaged in such human rituals for decades. But he was trying to learn, trying to remember what it meant to be connected to others. He reached out and clasped Kel's hand, the quantum god and the human soldier standing together on a world that had almost fallen to chaos, but had been saved through choices that defied pure logic. And in the warp, the four chaos gods watched, and for the first time in 10,000 years, they felt something approximating concern. The Necron tomb world, designated Gist Prime, had slumbered for 60 million years, its systems dormant since the war in heaven, when the ancient Necron Tyre had biotransferred their souls into immortal metal bodies. Now, its scanners detected an anomaly that matched stored parameters from that ancient war. A Citan-level reality manipulator had manifested in the galaxy. The Silent King himself, Zarek, last ruler of the Necron dynasties, received the data with cold fury. The Citan, the star gods who had promised the Necrontyr immortality and instead devoured their souls, had been shattered and enslaved millions of years ago. Every shard was accounted for, bound in tesseract labyrinths, weaponized or imprisoned. Yet here was a signature that matched their reality warping capabilities, unbound and free. This could not be permitted. Manhattan felt the Necron fleet emerge from their tomb ships before his quantum senses registered their physical presence. They simply appeared, no warp travel, no warning, utilizing technology so advanced it made the Imperium's greatest achievements look like stone tools. 30 crescent-shaped vessels materialized in Armageddon's orbit, their hulls inscribed with glyphs that predated human civilization by millions of years. The lead vessel opened communications through means Manhattan immediately recognized, quantum entanglement used as instantaneous transmission. A voice spoke in flawless Gothic, translated by Xenos technology that had decoded human language through simple observation. "Entity designated Dr. Manhattan. You will surrender yourself for assessment and containment. Resistance will result in planetary sterilization, followed by your forced acquisition. You have 30 seconds to comply." Manhattan teleported directly onto the Necron flagship, materializing in what he presumed was the command chamber. It was unlike any ship he'd encountered. No crew stations, no viewports, just vast spaces filled with impossible geometries and technology that operated on principles he couldn't immediately categorize. At the chamber's center stood a figure that radiated authority through pure presence. Zarek, the Silent King, his form a masterwork of living metal, his eyes burning with cold intelligence that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations. 23 seconds, Zarek stated. "You waste time with curiosity when you should be calculating survival probability." "I'm analyzing your technology," Manhattan replied. Your vessels operate outside standard physics, inertialess drives, probability manipulation weapons, matter phase generators. Fascinating. Your civilization achieved post-physical existence through technology rather than mutation. The Necrontier solved the problem of mortality by eliminating biology entirely. And lost our souls in the process? Sharek's voice carried infinite bitterness despite its mechanical flatness. The Citan promised us immortality. They gave us eternal imprisonment in metal shells, unable to feel, unable to truly live. We destroyed them for their betrayal. Now you appear, another reality manipulator, another god creature that threatens the natural order. We will not allow another Citan to rise. I'm not a Citan. I was human once. I became this through accident, not design. Irrelevant. You possess Citan-level capabilities. You manipulate reality at the fundamental level. You are either weapon or threat, and we permit neither to exist uncontrolled. Sharek gestured, and the chamber filled with Lich Guard, elite Necron warriors whose war scythes could phase through matter and whose shields generated quantum barriers. Final warning, Dr. Manhattan. Surrender, or we demonstrate why the Necrons ruled this galaxy when humanity's ancestors were still single-celled organisms. Manhattan examined the Lich Guard and recognized technology that actually posed a threat. Their weapons operated on quantum disruption principles that could potentially destabilize his molecular cohesion. Their shields generated null fields similar to what Pariah's produced, areas where his quantum manipulation might be suppressed. The Necrons had fought Citan before. They knew how to kill gods. I choose option 3, Manhattan said. I listen to what you actually want rather than your threats. Sharek tilted his head, a gesture that seemed almost human despite his mechanical nature. You are perceptive. Very well. I want 2 things. Confirmation that you are not Citan-spawned, and assurance that you will not become a threat to the Necron awakening. The galaxy faces extinction from multiple vectors. The Tyranid swarms devour from beyond. Chaos corruption spreads from within, and the younger races war endlessly. The Necrons will reclaim what was stolen from us. But we cannot do so if reality manipulators interfere with our restoration. You want the galaxy for yourselves. We want what is ours by right of prior dominion. Humanity are children playing with forces they cannot comprehend. The Imperium will fall, if not to chaos, then to the Tyranids, or to simple entropy. When it does, the Necrons will remain, as we have remained through every previous extinction event. We are patient. We are inevitable. We are the galaxy's rightful inheritors. Manhattan processed this worldview. The Necrons saw themselves as caretakers, waiting for temporary occupants to vacate property that had always belonged to them. It was logical from their perspective. They had ruled for millions of years before the younger races evolved. But it dismissed the current inhabitants as irrelevant, expendable, temporary inconveniences. Humanity deserves to exist, Manhattan said quietly. Their Imperium is flawed, their methods brutal, but they fight for survival against impossible odds. The Emperor suffers for 10,000 years to give them a chance. That determination means something. The Emperor is a corpse clinging to failure. His Imperium is a rotting monument to hubris. Humanity had their chance at greatness during their dark age of technology, and they squandered it. Now they regress, replacing knowledge with faith, innovation with dogma. They are already dead. They simply refuse to acknowledge it. Then why not just wait? Manhattan countered. If humanity is doomed anyway, why risk war with me? Why not simply sleep another few millennia until the Imperium collapses on its own? Sharek was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something that almost approached emotion. Because I am tired, Dr. Manhattan. Tired of waiting. Tired of watching younger races make the same mistakes we made. Tired of sleeping through ages while the galaxy tears itself apart. I want to end this. I want to restore the Necron dynasties, rebuild what was lost, and perhaps find a way to reverse the biotransference, to become truly alive again, not merely conscious metal. Manhattan understood then. Sarek wasn't just threatening humanity out of malice. He was desperate. Desperate to restore his people, desperate to find meaning in an existence that had stripped away everything that made existence meaningful. The Silent King and the God Emperor were opposite sides of the same coin, beings who'd sacrificed their humanity for their people's survival and now suffered eternally for that choice. "I will not help you exterminate humanity," Manhattan said firmly, "but I will not interfere with your awakening, provided you don't attack human worlds without cause. The galaxy is large enough for multiple powers to coexist if they choose coexistence over conquest. The young always believe in coexistence. The old know better. There are no permanent alliances, only temporary truces before the next war." Sarek gestured, and the Lich Guard raised their weapons. "But very well, I offer this. Prove you are not Citan spawn. Allow my cryptex to examine your quantum structure. If you are what you claim, a human transformed by science, then we will withdraw. If you are Citan-touched, we will disassemble you atom by atom and imprison each particle in separate tesseract vaults." Manhattan considered the offer. Allowing Necron examination meant revealing the fundamental principles behind his quantum existence. It meant giving a potentially hostile power detailed information about his capabilities and limitations. But refusing meant war. And war with the Necrons would devastate Armageddon and potentially draw Imperial forces into a conflict they couldn't win. He thought of Kell and the Cadians, of the civilians he'd saved from chaos corruption, of the Emperor's suffering for 10,000 years. He thought of his own journey from detachment to engagement, from observing to acting, from God to ally. Agreed, but the examination happens here in orbit, with Imperial observers present. Whatever your cryptex discover, both sides learn simultaneously. Sarek's eyes burned brighter, approval, perhaps, or amusement. "You are learning diplomacy, quantum anomaly. Very well, summon your Imperial witnesses. Let us determine what you truly are." Within the hour, Lord Inquisitor Voss and Brother Captain Alaric stood aboard the Necron flagship, surrounded by technology that made them both deeply uncomfortable and by Xenos that should have been shot on sight. But the Emperor's will had been clear through astropathic relay. Observe. Learn. Allow Manhattan to prove his nature. The cryptex, Necron scientist sorcerers who'd mastered technologies indistinguishable from magic, deployed scanning equipment that made the Mechanicus's Auspex arrays look primitive. They examined Manhattan from every conceivable angle, probing his quantum structure with tools that operated on principles Voss couldn't begin to understand. Finally, the lead cryptech, an ancient being designated Illuminor Ceras, whose reputation for horrific experiments was legendary even among Necrons, delivered his assessment. Fascinating, unprecedented, impossible, yet here he stands. Ceras's voice crackled with genuine enthusiasm. He is not Citan-spawned. His quantum nature derives from exposure to what humans call the intrinsic field, a phenomenon involving particle accelerators and quantum probability collapse. He became superposition-given consciousness through scientific accident, not divine essence. He is unique. A sample size of one. You must do nothing, Zarek interrupted coldly. He is not Citan. That is sufficient. The Silent King turned to Manhattan. You are free to go, Dr. Manhattan. But know this, the Necrons are awakening across the galaxy. Soon, we will reclaim what was stolen. When that day comes, I hope you remember this conversation and choose wisely which side to defend. Manhattan looked at Sarek, at Voss, at Alaric, at the gathered representatives of three powers locked in eternal conflict. I will defend those who deserve defending, whether they're human, Necron, or something else entirely. I've learned that meaning comes from commitment, from choosing to protect what you value even when logic says it's futile. That's what the Emperor taught me. That's what humanity's struggle demonstrates every day. Then you are doomed to disappointment, Sarek said, because in this galaxy everything eventually fails. Everything eventually dies. Even gods. Perhaps. But until then, I choose to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Manhattan teleported back to Armageddon, leaving the Necrons to their ancient designs and the Imperium to their desperate wars. But as he materialized above the hive world, he felt something shift in the quantum field, multiple presences converging on his location from across the segmentum. The great rift pulsed with renewed energy. Chaos had not forgotten him, and somewhere in the warp the four gods were preparing something that would test everything Manhattan had learned about commitment, sacrifice, and the price of caring in a galaxy designed to punish hope. The great rift tore wider, and through it came damnation wearing 1,000 faces. Manhattan perceived the assault before it materialized, demon legions numbering in the millions, chaos space marines from 4 different traitor warbands, and at their head something that made even his quantum consciousness recoil, a united avatar of the 4 chaos gods, a being of such concentrated corruption that its mere presence in real space began warping the laws of physics. All 4 chaos gods had agreed. Dr. Manhattan was too dangerous to remain free. If he could not be corrupted, he would be destroyed, and they were willing to sacrifice entire legions to accomplish it. The entity emerged above Armageddon, a towering figure that was simultaneously armored warrior, plague-ridden corpse, sensual demon prince, and ever-changing sorcerer. It spoke with 4 voices unified. Jonathan Osterman. You have rejected our gifts. You have banished our servants. You have proven resistant to corruption. But you cannot resist annihilation. We are chaos eternal. We are the universe's truth. Order is illusion. Entropy is inevitable. And you are merely delaying what must be. Manhattan stood in orbit above Armageddon and watched as the demon legions descended. Below, Imperial forces scrambled to respond, guard regiments mobilizing, space marine strike forces deploying from orbiting battle barges, the Mechanicus bringing weapon platforms online. But Manhattan calculated the odds and found them devastating. Armageddon would fall. The system would fall. The entire segmentum might fall if this chaos assault went unchecked. He could run. Teleport away, leave this galaxy entirely, return to the detachment that had defined his existence for decades. The logical choice was survival, his own survival. But he'd made a promise to Kell, to the civilians he'd saved, to the Emperor, perhaps, though that relationship remained complicated. He'd promised to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Manhattan divided himself into 1,000 instances. Each instance was weaker than the whole. That was quantum mechanics' price for multiplication. But 1,000 Dr. Manhattans, even diminished, represented power on a scale the galaxy had rarely witnessed. They spread across the battlefield like blue stars, each one engaging demon legions, each one manipulating matter and reality to unmake chaos's physical manifestations. The united avatar laughed as it descended toward Manhattan's primary instance. Clever. Divide to conquer. But we are infinite. You are singular. Mathematics favors chaos. Mathematics favors observation over probability, Manhattan replied. He reached into the quantum foam and pulled, drawing energy from the universe's fundamental structure. His form blazed brighter than a sun, Cherenkov radiation intensifying until it became visible from orbit as a blue star rising over Armageddon's ash-choked horizon. The Avatar struck with all four powers simultaneously: Khorne's endless rage, Tzeentch's reality-warping sorcery, Nurgle's entropic decay, Slanesh's sensation overload. The combined assault hit Manhattan's primary instance with enough force to crack a planet's crust. Manhattan observed the attack, calculated its quantum signature, and inverted it. The energy didn't dissipate. It reflected back toward its source. Chaos attacking chaos, the four gods' unified power turned against their own avatar. The entity staggered, its form destabilizing as contradictory energies tore at its existence. Impossible. You cannot turn chaos against itself. We are unity in diversity, harmony in discord. Your contradictions pretending to be whole, Manhattan stated. He moved forward through the Avatar's attacks, quantum phasing through matter and energy that should have obliterated him. Khorne hates sorcery, yet you channeled Tzeentch's magic. Nurgle embraces stagnation, yet you employ Tzeentch's change. Slanesh pursues excess, yet Khorne demands discipline. Your four opposing forces bound together temporarily because I represent something all of you fear. Fear. We are fear manifest. You fear irrelevance, Manhattan continued, his voice cutting through the Avatar's protests. The Emperor tried to make you irrelevant by denying your existence. It failed because humanity needed faith, needed emotion, needed you whether they wanted to or not. But I represent something different. Existence without emotion, power without corruption, order without tyranny. If I succeed in helping humanity stabilize, if I show them a path between the Emperor's authoritarianism and your corruption, you become unnecessary, both extremes, rejected. The Avatar's four aspects warred with each other, the temporary unity fracturing under Manhattan's analysis. Khorne's rage turned toward Tzeentch's scheming. Nurgle's acceptance clashed with Slanesh's striving. The Chaos Gods alliance was crumbling because Manhattan had identified its fundamental flaw. They couldn't truly unify without negating their own natures. Manhattan's 1,000 instances converged, reforming into a single being of unprecedented power. He had been holding back, conserving energy, fighting defensively. No longer. If Chaos wanted to test his commitment, he would show them exactly what a quantum god could accomplish when he chose to act without restraint. He reached into the great rift itself. The Imperium screamed as Manhattan's consciousness touched its fundamental structure. He wasn't trying to close the rift that would take power beyond even his capabilities. But he could stabilize it, could impose quantum certainty on the probability chaos that sustained it, could force order onto the disorder, if only temporarily. The rift began to shrink, reality reasserting itself against the warp's intrusion. Demon legions across Armageddon suddenly found themselves losing cohesion, their physical manifestations destabilizing as the barrier between warp and real space strengthened. They weren't banished permanently, that was impossible, but they were being pushed back, forced to retreat into the Imperium. The four gods roared in unified fury, and Manhattan felt their full attention focus on him like the gaze of a star gone supernova. They were pouring everything into maintaining the rift, fighting his stabilization efforts with the accumulated emotional energy of quadrillions of souls across the galaxy. It wasn't enough. Manhattan was order incarnate. He was quantum collapse made conscious. He was the observer that fixed reality through the simple act of observation, and he was observing the rift as closed, sealed, healed. The universe had no choice but to comply with his observation, because at the fundamental level, observation defined reality. The Great Rift contracted, its boundaries pulling back sector by sector. It wouldn't close completely. The damage was too extensive, the warp's intrusion too deeply embedded. But it stabilized, its expansion halting, its chaotic energies contained. The Imperium nihilus remained cut off from the Astronomican's light, but at least the wound stopped spreading. The Avatar shattered, its four components unable to maintain cohesion without the rift's full power sustaining them. Four distinct demon princes materialized briefly, champions of each chaos god, and all four spoke simultaneously before vanishing back into the warp. Korn, this is not over, Manhattan. War is eternal. Tziench, you have merely changed the game, not ended it. Nurgle, all things decay, even quantum gods. Slanesh, we will meet again when you have learned to feel. Then they were gone, and silence fell over Armageddon. The demon legions had retreated. The Chaos Space Marines had fled into the warp. The planet was saved, though at tremendous cost. Millions dead, hive cities in ruins, entire regiments decimated. Manhattan descended to the surface, his form dimmer now, energy depleted from the effort of stabilizing the rift. He found Kell in the command bunker, the colonel orchestrating recovery efforts with the efficiency of a man who'd done this too many times before. You did it, Kell said simply. You actually closed the Great Rift, or stabilized it, at least. The astropaths are reporting clearer signals across the segmentum. The Astronomican's light is reaching farther. You've given the Imperium a chance. I gave them time, Manhattan corrected. Chaos will return. The Necrons are awakening. The Tyranids still approach from beyond the galactic rim. Humanity's existential threats haven't disappeared. I've merely bought them years instead of months. Years we'll use to rebuild, to fortify, to prepare for whatever comes next. Kell extended his hand again, and this time Manhattan took it without hesitation. The Emperor was right about you. You're not just power, you're hope. Real hope. Not the desperate faith we've been clinging to. You prove that impossible situations can be overcome through will and sacrifice. Manhattan looked at his glowing hand, clasping Kell's calloused one, quantum god and mortal human, connected through simple gesture of respect. I'm learning that hope requires effort, that caring means accepting pain. That meaning is found not in detachment, but in choosing what to protect, and then fighting for it, even when logic says it's futile. Welcome to humanity, Kell said with a tired smile. It's a terrible experience. Glad you're staying. Above, the absolute righteousness descended from orbit, Voss and Alaric no doubt coming to interrogate, investigate, and determine what imperial classification to apply to the quantum anomaly that had just saved an entire segmentum. Manhattan would face their questions, their suspicions, their attempts to control or weaponize him. But he'd also face the gratitude of those he'd saved, the respect of warriors like Kell, the tentative hope of a dying Imperium that maybe, just maybe, they had an ally powerful enough to turn the tide. And somewhere, chained to the Golden Throne, the Emperor watched through a billion psychic eyes and felt something he hadn't felt in 10,000 years, the possibility that his plan might actually succeed, that humanity might survive after all, that the sacrifice of countless billions might not have been in vain. Dr. Manhattan stood on Armageddon's scarred surface and looked toward Terra, toward the Emperor's suffering, toward the Imperium's endless wars. He had chosen his path, had committed himself to this galaxy's fate, had learned to care again despite knowing the pain caring would bring. In his universe, he'd been a god who'd walked away from humanity because their problems seemed too small. In this universe, he was becoming something different, a god who stayed, who fought, who suffered alongside those he'd chosen to protect. The future remained uncertain. The warp made prophecy unreliable. But Manhattan had learned that uncertainty was acceptable, that not knowing the outcome didn't mean the struggle was meaningless, that sometimes the only way to find meaning was to commit to something larger than yourself and then simply endure. He was Dr. Manhattan. He was quantum superposition given consciousness. He was order in a galaxy of chaos, and he was humanity's ally for whatever that was worth in the grim darkness of the far future. Dr. Manhattan stood at the observation deck of the Absolute Righteousness, watching Armageddon rotate below. A world scarred but surviving, its hive cities burning with the light of reconstruction rather than destruction. 3 months had passed since the stabilization of the Great Rift, and the Imperium was adapting to its new reality. A quantum god walked among them, allied but not controlled, powerful but not corrupted. The Emperor's psychic presence touched Manhattan's consciousness, a brief communion across impossible distance. You have learned what I hoped you would learn. That power without purpose is emptiness. That commitment to something beyond yourself gives meaning to existence, even when that existence spans eternity. The Imperium faces darkness still, but now we face it together. Manhattan didn't respond with words, but with acknowledgement. He understood now what he hadn't understood on his Earth, that being a god meant nothing if you had nothing worth being a god for. That transcendence without connection was just another form of prison, that the Emperor's 10,000 years of suffering had meaning precisely because he chose to suffer for something he loved. The Chaos Gods remained in the warp, watching, waiting, plotting. The Necrons continued their slow awakening across the galaxy. The Tyrannid's shadow crept closer from beyond known space. The Orcs continued their eternal wah, and the Imperium ground forward, brutal and necessary, sacrificing billions to save trillions, fighting the only war that mattered, the war for humanity's survival. Manhattan had found his place in this nightmare galaxy, not as savior or destroyer, but as witness and ally. He would fight where fighting mattered, save who could be saved, impose order where chaos threatened to consume everything, and he would do it not from detachment, but from commitment, from the deliberate choice to care about beings whose lives were infinitesimal compared to his cosmic perspective. Colonel Kell's words echoed in his quantum consciousness. Welcome to humanity. It's a terrible experience. Glad you're staying. Manhattan allowed himself something he hadn't felt in decades, the faintest approximation of satisfaction. Not happiness, he wasn't certain he could achieve that anymore, but purpose, direction. The sense that his existence, however strange and powerful, now served something beyond mere observation of entropy's inevitable victory. The galaxy would continue burning. Wars would be fought. Worlds would fall, but some would be saved. Some battles would be won. Some light would persist against the darkness, and Dr. Manhattan would stand in that light, a blue beacon in the endless night, proving that even gods could learn to care again. The Imperium had gained an ally. Chaos had gained an enemy. The galaxy had gained something it hadn't known in 10 millennia, genuine uncertainty about the future. Manhattan couldn't see all outcomes anymore. The warp made prophecy unreliable, but perhaps that was better. Perhaps not knowing made the struggle meaningful. He looked toward Terra one final time, toward the Golden Throne, and the suffering god who'd shown him. That meaning required sacrifice. Then he turned his attention to the galaxy's endless conflicts, to the battles where his intervention might save thousands or millions. to the war that would define whether humanity survived or perished. Dr. Manhattan had made his choice. He would fight. He would endure. He would care despite the pain caring brought. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there was only war, that choice made all the difference. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. More stories await.